I don't know. It's on my computer. It's 12:57, so we're 3 minutes away from start. Do you want to wait until 1 o'clock? We currently have not everybody connected.
Yeah, I
yet.
think let's wait just a couple of minutes just in case people are dialing in and finding the room that they need to be in to be able to clue in. And I see Judy's also just now joined, so that's great.
Hi, everybody.
Okay. Hi, Judy. Just gonna put myself on mute.
Yeah, me too.
So the audience can't hear us at this point?
Yeah, no, I think everybody should be able to hear us now.
Okay.
Now that we are on air, as I understand it. Good morning, good morning or afternoon, everybody. I believe you should be able to hear me. This is Omar Chowdhury, Vice Chair of the ATIS Technical Committee. Just as a note, we'll wait a couple of minutes before we get started here. We are going to be using the polling feature that's available here on the ITS on the GoToMeeting. And so over the course of the webinar, we're going to have a couple of polls. One is just to learn a little bit more about those who are dialing in, whether or not you have additional other people, and then with you, and then just some feedback on the webinar itself at the end. So I'm going to launch this poll.
Okay.
All right, Judy, are you there? Can I invite Judy, or maybe I can I unmute Judy? All right, there you go. So let me close this poll, and let me see how I do that. We've gotten our responses. 94% of the people have voted on the poll, so that's great. We really appreciate this. And Judy, I'll maybe turn it over to you to let's get started.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Omar. That's great. Yeah, thank you everyone for participating in that poll. Really appreciate the feedback. My name is Judy Yu. I am the chair of the ATIS committee. We were responsible for running the events and meeting the mandate of the technical committee. Omar Chowdhury is the vice chair, and he's been working hard to pull this presentation together as a part of the work that we do together. Omar, if you can, I think on the screen we are not seeing the introduction presentation slides yet. If you could put that on. Yes, thank you very much. Today we're going to be talking about Alberta Transportation's RWIS journey, and that entails a number of years of learning and experiences that I'm sure that the audience will appreciate hearing about. We hope that we'll receive many questions today. I'd look forward to hearing back from our presenters on how they dealt with the things that appeared along the way, along the journey, and learning from those experiences. Before we start the presentation, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. One being to keep your microphone on mute. Attendees, please. This will be very helpful to our presenters. As well, if you have questions, please submit them on the chat box. What we've decided to do is to have Omar field the questions and identify which ones need to be grouped together so that the presenters can address them in one go. And that might occur inside the presentation if there's enough questions about any given topic. And otherwise, we'll hold them until the end. So whether you've submitted your questions early on or later, we will address them at the appropriate times so as not to interrupt the flow. Also, at the end, there will be another question towards the latter part of the presentation on polling, and hopefully you can answer the last question for us before you leave the presentation. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We have Erin Davidson, the manager of the Provincial Transportation Management Centre for Alberta Transportation Technical Standards Branch. Thank you, Erin, for joining us today. Also, we have Allan Bartman, the Acting Director of Highway Operations for Alberta Transportation. And I'll let the speakers give a bit of a background on themselves. I think they're probably more appropriate to do that than me. And then we'll roll on with the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Erin Davidson, and as Judy mentioned, I am the manager of the Provincial Transportation Management Centre. I joined Alberta Transportation in 2014 after a brief stint with the federal government. I joined as an operator here in 511 Alberta, and I'm now the manager of the TMC, which encompasses 511 Alberta, using that as our communications platform to the public, traveling public, industry, internal and external stakeholders.
And I am Allan Bartman. I am the Acting Director of Highway Operations. Been with Alberta Transportation since 2017. Basically, a bit of background on myself. Graduated from the U of A in 1994. Worked at a couple different highway maintenance contractors, one in BC and then one here in Alberta. Then moved over to the city of Edmonton. Worked there for about 10 and some years, and then moved over to transportation. So that's kind of my life story with respect to engineering.
Perfect. So I guess we'll do our best to give our perspective on the evolution and use of RWIS here in Alberta. We have some fairly unique things, I think, that we do a little bit here. So hopefully we can give you some insight. Yeah, we're happy to answer any questions possible. And if we can't answer them, we will certainly find somebody who can. So we have just a brief agenda, just going over sort of the role of Alberta Transportation, what we're responsible for, a little bit of the evolution of the RWIS here in the province, and are looking ahead to the future, what we're planning for RWIS and other pieces of RWIS, and then some lessons learned just to kind of encompass everything from our history.
All right, so Alberta Transportation's role. So in the province, we have about 32,000 kilometers of road, so that's centerline kilometers. More than 85% of our network is paved, and the maintenance of the highways is done by private highway maintenance contractors. At the moment, we have 6 maintenance contractors that look after the rural roads, and then we have a few other contractors as well that look after our ring roads around Edmonton and Calgary. And was that one mine? So some of the challenges with winter maintenance, we've got a lot of different geography throughout the province, as well as climatic conditions. Typically, we have a long and typically cold winter season. Some of the routes are very long to get out to remote areas. So we might have a lot of deadheading or so on between different municipalities. And then some of the challenges we face are the Calgary and Edmonton ring road traffic. So we manage the ring roads there, give or take 50 to 100,000 kilometers a day on those. So that can create its own challenges dealing with the weather and the public traveling on the roads at the same time. So same challenges that I'm sure are seen across the country, across North America, Europe, anyone who has winter. And one of the main things we rely on is reliable road and weather condition information is the key to safer roads in the winter. The better information we have, the better job we can do. All right. So this is a bit of the history on our RWIS program in Alberta. In 2000, we developed the plan for implementing RWIS. 2004, we're working on getting 75 stations up and running, primarily on the national highway system and then the key routes. The map we had up a couple slides ago, the red roads there were the highway or the national highway system. So in Alberta, it's basically from the US border up to Calgary, Trans-Canada across the bottom of the province, well, sort of towards the middle of the province, Highway 3 across the bottom of the province, then Highway 2 between Edmonton and Calgary, Highway 16, which crosses the province again between Lloydminster and Jasper, and then northwards up through Highway 43 up to Grand Prairie, and then north up to the Northwest Territories through High Level. So that's primarily where we started with the RWIS. In 2005, 2007, we put out our first contract for managing the RWIS. 2011, we did a bit more expansion on the number of stations. We added another 35. Right now, I believe we're sitting at 112. And at that point, then we had about 200 users. The majority would have been either AT staff or our maintenance contractors. In 2012, we started integrating MDSS with RWIS. So that's the maintenance decision support system. 2019, which is pretty much where we're at right now, we've got 112 RWIS stations in total using the next generation of RWIS. So we've got weather management, we're doing anti-icing on some of the roads, and we're gradually introducing mobile RWIS. We've got about 20 units right now that the province owns, and some of the contractors are using, and a few of the AT staff. As well, this last round of maintenance contracts that came into effect in August of last year, there was a requirement for the patrol vehicles to have mobile RWIS units. So the contractors are just kind of getting those up and going right now, and we're getting those gradually integrated into our system. And we've got about 400 users now. We are looking at some expansion. Right now, we're facing a lot of fiscal restraint in Alberta, not dissimilar to the rest of the country, but that slowed things down a little bit. We are looking on expanding our RWIS network over the next few years, as well as our camera network in addition. And so what that'll be is we're looking at possibly mobile RWIS, which is the ones on the patrol vehicles, mini RWIS, which would be an RWIS station that is maybe set up temporarily for 6 months or so, could even be on a trailer, and then adding some more RWIS stations on the ring roads, which are actually happening over the next year or two here.
Okay, so this is basically what our standard RWIS sites look like. So these are the ones you'll see driving on the highway network. So they basically have just a number of pieces and components to it that all feed into the RWIS website. which is hosted by our contractor Wood. So it's all primarily done via cellular communication for us, which can pose a few challenges, as I'm sure some of you probably know. So that information is sent to both the central server, but then it's also sent to some other users as well. So you can access it from home, like a regular desktop. They have a mobile app as well, which is heavily used by both our contractors and our local AT staff. And then it's also available on a more internal website for the for both the highway maintenance contractor, operations staff, and for my team here in 511 Alberta. So we use that quite frequently as well. We have it up pretty much constantly and just monitoring what's coming across there. So this is some of what's available at primarily most of the RWIS sites. So there's a number of pavement sensors that are probably what we rely on the most. So there's surface sensors right at the surface there that are capable of detecting obviously precipitation, but also chemical concentration of what maybe has been put down by the contractor. And then we have subsurface probes as well. So there's 2 at different levels. And then all that pavement data is sent to the central server for the Wood website, and then they make decisions upon that information. There's also relative humidity and temperature, wind speed direction, and any precipitation, whether that's falling or not. And they also all have camera sites as well. So, and all that information is fed into 511 Alberta as well. So we capture it from the Wood website. So that's a lot of data, obviously. So what can we do with it? So kind of some obvious things here, and I think some of my team here in the 511 Alberta, we tend to consider ourselves amateur meteorologists after looking at this for a long time. So obviously wind and wind speed and wind direction can determine blowing snow potential, especially when it's mixed in with whether there's any precipitation falling. Cameras provide us sort of a visual view and the ability to confirm what is being maybe said by the public or what we're seeing from our highway maintenance contractors as well. And then the observations that are gathered from the RWIS sites also go into the generation of forecasts as well that are compiled by Wood. The pavement temperature is probably the best one that we rely on the most. In the summer, we're pretty much stuck with barren dry or barren wet with a little bit of a rainstorm coming through. But in the winter, that's the one we're looking at the most. So that's when we can determine whether we're looking to see freezing overnight or frost or anything like that is just really going to have a huge impact on the road condition, which is our primary concern here in 511, but also for our highway maintenance contractors as well, so they can make decisions on what they may or may not do in terms of maintenance. So looking towards the future of RWIS. So right now the RWIS forecast up to the next 24 hours, and then it updates that forecast every 3 hours. What we've had in this last, I think, 2 or 3 years has actually been pre-storm briefings. So our Wood, our contractor, actually will set up when certain criteria is met during the winter season, which runs roughly from October to April. They'll set up pre-storm briefings to notify both my team here at 511, but also our local transportation staff and our highway maintenance contractors. And they'll provide information about what we're expecting in terms of, typically it's snow or freezing rain. But what we're expecting in terms of accumulation, when we're expecting it to start and stop, what areas are going to be affected, what highways, and sort of, they also provide blowing snow and visibility issues as well. Excuse me. So we've found that's been really helpful in identifying what we can do in terms of, for my team here, it's really helpful in terms of staffing. So if I'm looking at a weekend where maybe I only have 1 or 2 people on and we're looking at a storm rolling through that's going to be impacting a huge portion of the province, I can use that as justification for possibly bringing in more staff. So it provides us an idea of where we can focus a lot of our information on. We're also providing weather and pavement forecasting for all the highways, so that's included in our WOOD website as well, which is available to the contractors. And as Allan mentioned as well, we're looking to expand the use of the mobile RWIS and provide that more integration into both the MDSS, but also into the forecasting as well. And similar to what Allan mentioned, we're always looking to expand the network. We know where there are some gaps, and we've taken both feedback from both the public, but also from our highway maintenance contractors and what they're looking for and where they need. Maybe it is just a mini RWIS, and maybe it's just a weather station that's, they don't have enough local weather stations, so maybe in the winter there's an area that's really lacking, or it's a special climatic condition, which there are quite a few. That's something we're considering as well once we can make those decisions. And then future as well, we're looking to enhance and refine the MDSS, the Maintenance Decision Support System, and get more use out of that and make the decision that it renders even better with more and more information, good information being included into that as well.
Erin, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
So there were a couple of questions that kind of came up with that, and maybe you might talk a little bit about the MDSS in detail in terms of who uses it, how it's used, and so forth. But if you go back to the slide where it shows the pavement sensors, for example, and you were mentioning it's able to collect the chemical concentration and so forth. Are decisions made, so for example, if the chemical concentration is known to be high and snow is coming in and you might have blowing snow, are you using that as information that you may start to see icing form because the snow that's blowing across is melting, or if the road is cold enough that maybe you don't have to worry because it'll blow right across the road?
So I'll take that one. So what we do is with the RWIS stations, we'll get all the data, whether it's wet or dry, chemical concentration and so on. They do have a few algorithms built in which will actually put out an ice warning if, through all the technology we're expecting ice. Primarily, we're still using that as a bit of a guideline. We use that in combination with our patrols and so on. As the years have went by and as we've got more RWIS stations out there, we've been relying more on it, but we're still at the point where we're still evolving. Certain areas are more reliant on the RWIS and certain areas are less. A lot of that depends on the density of the stations and frankly, the weather just in those particular areas. But we certainly use that to help us with our decision making. And that's sort of where we'll get to in some of the MDS stuff that we talk about here in a few minutes.
That's great. All right, I'll let you back to where you to continue. Thank you.
No problem.
One question I have, we have the chat box open in the bottom right corner of the screen. Is that showing on everyone's screen or just on ours here? Okay, yeah. All right, so we should be good. Okay, so on to the MDSS. So the Maintenance Decision Support System. So we are still working with this one to get a bit better buy-in with our contractors and even some of our transportation staff. Basically, the MDSS will take the forecasts and it will take the information that we receive back from our AVLS systems, combine it together and essentially produce, let's call it maintenance forecasts or suggested maintenance. So with this one, it's been a bit of a struggle getting certain areas to buy into it. I think a lot of that has just been if we don't have accurate information, whether it's through the AVLS or through the RWIS, if we don't have a good density of stations, it's tough to base your decisions on it. With that said, I'd say over the last 4 to 5 years, the contractors are using it more than they have been in the past. I think what we'll find is as we expand our mobile RWIS network, we'll get better information there, so that should help with this. But essentially the idea is that the MDSS gathers all of the information, gathers the upcoming forecast, and makes predictions about what maintenance we think should happen out there. The second part to it is as we get the mobile RWIS, as our AVLS becomes more advanced, it will feed the actual information back after the timing on that. And what we're also going to include in the AVLS, and we're getting there, is, you know, what materials did we put out? How much did we put out? When did we put it out? And so on. So the idea being that the MDSS can essentially train itself to do a bit better. Because if it suggested we salt and we went out and salted, but it didn't quite do it, well, then it'll learn from that. On the other hand, if it suggested that we salt and it doesn't have any information back, then it just leaves some gaps in the system. So the more information that we can get on actual conditions and real time and stuff, it should make the MDSS more accurate. So every year we do RWIS training. We usually talk about the MDSS as well at it. And so every year it's kind of growing. We're not there yet, but hopefully in the next few years, you know, it's just becoming a more reliable tool that's in their toolbox for dealing with winter.
So kind of this is a future, well, current, but also likely to be expanded at some point, is our road condition warning system, which is tied into the RWIS. So we have sort of two different versions here in Alberta. We have on Highway 22, Lundbrick is a wind advisory system. So Highway 22 is identified as a wind corridor. It's also heavily utilized by the trucking industry. So it basically runs from the junction of Highway 1 west of Calgary and goes all the way down to Highway 3. Kind of roughly in the Pincher Creek area. So it's a more direct route down into southern BC as well. So as it's been identified as a wind corridor, we installed this wind advisory system, which is a combination of both beacons and sign and DMS beacons as well. So kind of that one image in the corner there. So that's what's included in one of the systems. So it basically displays the wind speeds in real time, and it sources that information from the RWIS station that's located on Highway 22 near Lundbrick. So that's where we're sourcing the information that's displayed on the wind advisory signs. So the signs will display a wind speed constantly, and when the system detects that the wind speed is over 80 kilometers sustained, it will then activate the flashing beacons at all of the signs. And so they're strategically located so that if a commercial vehicle, it's typically commercial vehicles, that they're coming down Highway 22, that they have the opportunity to duck over and take Highway 2 coming south. So it has some, you know, driving time and economical impacts, but it also prevents semi-truck from blowing over, especially empty ones. We've had quite a few where they actually will blow over on Highway 22. So that information is also integrated into 511 Alberta and is displayed on the site publicly for people's interest, basically. The other version is, I guess, more of a traditional road condition warning system. We have two, both on bridges. So they're on Highway 22 at Drayton Valley Bridge and the Highway 2 Dunvegan Bridge. So Highway 2 Dunvegan is north of Grand Prairie, and then Highway 22 Drayton Valley would be southwest of Edmonton. So those are a set of 4 dynamic messaging signs at each bridge, so 2 on either side, and those signs are tied into the local RWIS station at those sites. The road condition warning system will detect, it constantly monitors the bridge conditions and will automatically display predetermined messages on those associated DMS, depending on what it detects for those bridges. So it could be something like bridge condition icy and that sort of thing. So it's mostly, we mostly utilize it in the winter. But that information is also integrated into 511 Alberta as well. So those signs, the Highway 22 and Highway 2 signs are actually able to be remotely overridden here in 511 Alberta. The Highway 22 Lundberg sign is basically autonomous. So although it's integrated into 511 Alberta, we can remotely monitor the health of the sign, but we can't actually effectively do anything to the sign, as opposed to the Highway 22 one, which we basically have full control over.
All right, so mobile RWIS. We've mentioned this a few times. So mobile RWIS, essentially it's a unit attached to a patrol vehicle, or it could even be a plow truck, but we're not going there at this point in Alberta. But basically it will give you pretty much the same information as your RWIS. It's going to give you your pavement condition, whether it's bare or, well, wet or dry. Give you your pavement temperature as well as your air temperature, any chemical concentration on the road, and it will also give you a friction measurement. Basically, what we are planning to use the mobile RWIS for is to increase the amount of weather information we have and fill in gaps in areas where there are no RWIS. So what Wood is planning to do as we get the mobile RWIS running around on the roads a bit more is to use the information from these to identify cold and hot spots on certain roads. We, like I'm sure everybody else, have certain areas where, you know, you drive 10 kilometers and it's pretty consistent. All of a sudden you go into a valley and it's completely different. And drive 10 kilometers, climb back out of that valley, and you're back to where you were before. So there's that, or there's snowbelt areas and so on. So the idea is to use the information from the mobile RWIS to help better forecast events. Because it's mobile, it's providing real-time information. The data is going to be collected before, during, and after the storms and during patrols, and it's all going to be archived for now. And then gradually, as we get more developed systems, then we'll be making use of that as well. The friction factor on the mobile RWIS, we're not making use of that just yet, but we would eventually like to get to the point of, once we have confidence in it, relying on that friction factor to essentially tell us if a specification is being made or not. You know, currently, right now on the road specifications in the winter, a lot of it is very subjective. You know, is the road icy or not? Very wet, well, that's relatively obvious. But sometimes to know whether the road is slippery or not, you know, one person will say it is and another person won't. We're trying to get to the point where we have an instrument that will actually just give us a number to remove the subjectivity, so that way, if, let's say, the friction factor is 40 or above, then we're good. If it's 40 or below, then we consider it slippery and some treatment needs to be done. So that's more for the future contracts, but we're trying to get there eventually so we can take some of the subjectivity out of judging and put it to, you know, more hard measurements. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. Again, we're just growing with that one now. We've probably got our 20 units out there that the province owns, and there's a few out there with the contractors well under the new contracts, but we're still getting those integrated in with our AVLS system, as well as getting the information back to Wood. So we're hopeful that by the end of this winter, we've got a decent number added to it, and then fiddle around with it a bit more this summer, getting ready for next winter, and then hopefully have that many more running.
So obviously for RWIS, 511 Alberta and the TMC sort of came after RWIS. And so we probably took over RWIS in a way that wasn't really expected, and sort of brought it into the public domain, I guess. So all of the RWIS stations and the associated weather data is available to the public through our 511 Alberta platforms. So that includes both the website and our camera, or pardon me, our mobile app. The camera images themselves are also available through an open API for external use, so it's open data. So the Alberta Motor Association utilizes those, and we'll also see media outlets. The Weather Network was also displaying them as well for a period of time. So the weather data is not included in that API, just the camera images at this point. So we do partner with other agencies as well. So Parks Canada, particularly Banff National Park, the town of Banff, City of Calgary, we display their images on our platforms as well. And we're working with the City of Edmonton as well to display theirs, as well as the town of Canmore. So my team here plays a key role in monitoring the health of the network. Because my team is 24/7, we can see everything that's happening. And because we're sort of intimately invested in what the cameras and the RWIS are showing, we're constantly monitoring them. So if we do notice any issues that haven't necessarily been reported to us by the public yet, then we can report those to our contractor to be addressed, hopefully immediately. Sometimes it's just a remote reset, and sometimes maybe it's a site visit's required to address the issues. For my team here as well, we have access 24/7 to a meteorologist through our contractor Wood during the winter season, which has proved invaluable. We usually contact them probably about every 2 days, just trying to figure out what we're expecting for the next couple of days. If there's any areas we should focus on or areas we're expecting to maybe hear more often from our contractors or expect more incidents and things like that. A lot of the information that we display on the 511 platform, particularly the road conditions, has broader implications for other industries. So particularly the movement of overdimensional loads through the province. As part of their permitting requirements, they are required to check 511 Alberta, and if the road conditions are not appropriate for them to move, then they are not supposed to be moving. So it has some broader implications just outside of what, your day-to-day travel. So obviously the public appetite for cameras is just nonstop. We constantly get requests for more cameras, sometimes more RWIS, although primarily the camera images are the most requested. The public still utilizes the weather data, so they are very quick to tell us when a camera image is missing or is facing the ground or upside down, or if some pavement information is missing. So they are watching it. We don't get too many requests for historical weather data from the public. Sometimes there is an avid amateur meteorologist who might look for that information, but typically we're getting historical requests for the camera data. So it's typically it's either for our highway maintenance contractors, or we've instituted a policy here where we will only share that information if it's sourced from a first responder agency. So it needs to be basically the police, so either the RCMP or your local police department, and it needs to be part of an actual investigation. So we don't just hand the camera information out willy-nilly, and it's usually for collision investigation and sometimes missing persons. As far as I'm aware, our camera images have not actively been a source of finding a missing person, unfortunately, just due to the density of our network, but also their actual purpose is for road conditions and not detecting license plates, etc. So but it certainly put the RWIS into a public domain and given us a lens into where we maybe need more RWIS and more cameras, because I think the public has a real good sense of that as well, and we can combine that information with our highway maintenance contractors' thoughts and opinions.
All right, so some of the lessons learned that we've gathered over the last 20 or so years. Reliance on the RWIS network as well as the MDSS is higher in areas where we have more stations, which sort of makes sense. The maintenance contractors, they do still rely on their own methods and experience, and frankly, we wouldn't ever ask them not to. But with that, sometimes there is some reluctance to adopt the new tools. But again, what we found is over the last few years, as we're able to provide more technology, like let's say more stations and more data, then they have something they can use. Initially, when it was pretty sparse, You know, it might help out in one specific area, but then the gaps were just so large. RWIS and MDSS user training. So we're doing that every year, and we found that to be very helpful. I mean, there's new questions coming every year, new requests. Some of the stuff we can actually entertain because it might just be a minor tweak with our RWIS contractor. Local microclimate areas with no existing MARWIS or airport or other stations. So those, we know those are an issue. We're hoping to address that somewhat with the mobile RWIS, you know, because as the vehicles run through those areas, we should have the data from them. So that should help us with that a bit. There is more interest from the contractors with long-term contracts. So some of the P3 contracts, as well our most recent contracts, those are now typically 7 to 10 year terms as well. So as the contractors getting in for the long haul, the more information that they can kind of count on at time of bidding, you know, it helps their pricing and helps us that way. We are including provisions in the maintenance contracts for the contractors to provide mobile RWIS. At this point, we're looking at just the patrol vehicles. We may eventually expand that to plow trucks, but right now we just want to get the patrol vehicles going, get that integrated into the system, get that all working good. Then we'll tackle the plow trucks because those have different challenges themselves for the sensors and stuff with all the snow flying around and muck on the roads. Road weather forecast accuracy. So that is the key to MDSS being reliable. So I think we're getting a bit better with that every year. We have integrated the RWIS and MDSS into one platform. So Wood manages both of those for us. So that's working well. And we're also integrating RWIS, MDSS, and AVLS. Just to get that real-time feedback essentially out there. And finally, there's always political considerations in determining future camera locations. So, you know, the high volume areas, the high occupancy areas, typically we have a much denser camera network and we're always looking for more cameras, whereas some of the rural stuff, still certainly important, but you know, as we add more RWIS stations, then we'll add more cameras that way.
And I think that's it. There are a few questions already in the chat box that I guess we can go through and then we can kind of open it up. So the first one is, are you seeing larger variations in temperature extremes, wind gusts, or climate change indicators? I'll be honest, I'm not a meteorologist, although I feel like it sometimes. I wouldn't say maybe temperature extremes. I think for the last couple of years, though, what we've been seeing that's impacting the road conditions the most has been a lot of blowing snow. And I don't know if that's an indication of climate change, but that's been one thing that we've noticed has caused a lot of issues. It's just something that, you know, you can't really plow that off or sand and salt it. It just becomes a real problem for people traveling. That would be what I would say. Yeah, don't know about that one. I can flag this one if you want. So the second question is, do you coordinate with municipalities on management of weather events? I would say from a 511 perspective, no. On a highway maintenance level, I'm sure there is communication back and forth between, you know, both the contractor with the city and with the contractor with the MCIs with the city. On a 511 level, we don't. But if it becomes an event where it is impacting a larger area, and say, let's say, including Calgary, if it becomes such a broad event that we're looking either that it's impacting more than the local area and it needs a larger than local response, we can do one of two things. So if it's just at that kind of next level of weather event, we activate what's called a ministry action group here, which just brings in a few additional people to coordinate things like common media message. So we bring in our communications folks, we bring in our emergency management officer, and that sort of thing, and loop in our local transportation staff. If it goes beyond that, then it becomes a provincially managed issue. And so anything like that would go through our emergency management officer, who would sit at our provincial operations center, and we would filter everything through him. So it sort of becomes a one-stop shop there. And then we're dealing with it here. What we found during weather events, even emergency events, is that there's a lot of focus on that event, granted. But here in 511, we have a provincial view. So we need to be managing the entire province. So there could be an event that's impacting just southern Alberta, but we need to realize that there's stuff going on in Edmonton, there's stuff going on in Grand Prairie. So we're looking at a larger provincial view. So sometimes it just depends on at what level that event is at in terms of response. I think you might want to answer that one.
Okay. So how is RWIS ownership and maintenance dealt with in the P3 contracts? So at this point, we own the RWIS stations, the government of Alberta owns them. Now, with that said, if a P3 contractor wanted to put up their own additional ones, I don't think we would have any issue with that. We know that some contractors work with their own meteorologists, and that just because they're doing maintenance in other areas, so they may already have access to that. But for the most part, we own the RWIS stations. Those stations that we have, they're currently managed and maintained by Wood through a maintenance contract. That current contract was for 5 years and expires in 22. So I expect when we retender it for the next round, it'll probably be 5 years again and be of a similar methodology. Yeah.
We're open to any other questions?
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted, yes, thanks, Erin. I just wanted to remind everybody, if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat. We'll wait a second or two for people to enter some things in. And just a reminder that before we go, we'll have one more poll question, just to provide some feedback on the today's webinar. I had a pair of questions. One is, you guys have an extensive network now of RWIS sensors. Are you sharing that data? Because I think you said you have 400 or 500 users thereabouts. Are you sharing that data also with municipalities? Do they have access to the raw data and so forth that you have?
So the users would be like my team here, it would be local transportation staff, and primarily the bulk would be the highway maintenance contractors. We do share the data with, I believe, the city of Calgary and the city of Lethbridge in a joint data sharing agreement. So they would be able to, I guess maybe sharing is the wrong word, because they're using the Wood platform as well. So they can view our data on there. I don't know whether they could utilize it in any sort of format though, but they are able to view what we're sharing on there, and vice versa. So we can see the city of Calgary's RWIS stations, and we can see Lethbridge, their RWIS station as well.
Perfect. The other question was, you had, on your traffic map, or your 511 Alberta map, you showed all of the icons with the RWIS sites and the cameras and so forth. Do you provide or synthesize that information into like a colored road map? So bare pavement, one wheel track, covered or partially or fully covered type of display, or is it just purely the I also call it the raw data and the imagery that you have?
So on the 511 side, it would be the raw data. So what the camera is showing won't necessarily correspond to what the road condition is, just depending on where the camera is, what the contractor had updated, and depending on how long that segment is, and they're using the 80-20 rule as well. So It's a good indication, but of course they're limited in the network, so we can't have one every like 5 kilometers, which would be ideal and show exactly what the road conditions are. On the Wood website, however, each one of those icons, they would be different, but they all correspond to a color. So depending on what the pavement temperature and the pavement information is showing, those icons will change to a different color, which then corresponds to a different different pavement condition. So it could be chemically wet, it could be barren dry, it could be barren wet. So on the Wood platform, it kind of gives a nice visual of immediately what is being detected from that RWIS. But on the 511 side, we don't share that information, mainly because I think it would lead to a lot of, I think, confusion in the public in terms of why maybe that sensor is saying chemically wet, and yet the road conditions are saying maybe barren wet. We don't have a chemically wet option, so we're sort of, I guess we're a little bit of a gatekeeper in between there, between that, the information, and what the contractor is putting in as well.
Okay, yeah, because I know like here in Ontario, they generally show, you know, black for bare, yellow for partially covered, and so they have a color coded map essentially that's shown as opposed to providing access to the raw RWIS data, I believe. So I was just curious on that.
What I think there's would it help to show you the website? Oh, sorry, I think I talked over you there, but I can show you the Wood website as well if that would help.
That would be great, yes.
One maybe first.
Okay, so, all right, I'm doing some other things here on my 511 site. So this would be the 511 platform. So on the left hand or the right hand side here, those are the road condition colors that then would correspond to the segment here. So in this particular case, Highway 16 is barren dry, so it would be corresponding to black. So I don't know, I think the parks have a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, so we have a little bit of weather over kind of in the parks, the mountain parks. So the pink would be covered in either snow or ice. And then the yellow would be either partly covered snow or ice. So if we kind of look at that same area, which has a few RWIS stations, if we look at the Wood website, you can kind of see how they similarly slightly correspond, I should say. Like we don't have any on that section of Highway 40 here, but the color here would indicate barren dry, which in this case it is. But this one would be an ice watch. So depending on what it's detecting in terms of anything coming in, it's making those decisions. I think we're looking pretty good today, which is nice. Trace elements of, you know, moisture. Yesterday we would have had some stuff down here, but we're looking pretty good today in terms of weather conditions.
So yeah, so then on the 511 Alberta website with the colored road conditions there that you show, are those manually entered then by your staff or others, or is it, how is that data getting there? Because it looks quite defined in some respects of, you know, the small little yellow segment near Miette Hot Springs, for example.
Yeah, so all of the information that you see is either entered by my staff on behalf of the highway maintenance contractors, or is done directly by the highway maintenance contractors. So they all have access to the back end of the 511 platform, and they can enter in the road conditions for each individual highway segment that corresponds to their area of responsibility. These ones in here would be managed by both Jasper and then BAMP further down, and same thing with Waterton, which is managed by BAMP. So they act basically as a highway maintenance contractor, albeit not under transportation's jurisdiction, but they utilize the platform to provide that information as well. So it's all entered by the contractors.
Great. So I think there's 2 questions left, and we have about 7 minutes to go, so we're doing well on time. Does AT and 511 use forecast models as an additional layer of information on top of the RWIS? So do you get weather forecast information beyond just the RWIS data?
So the RWIS data itself will feed into the forecast for each of the RWIS stations that we have. Maybe if you can go there. If you click onto the RWIS station itself, it gives you the option. You can look at the camera, you can look at the forecast, you can look at, I don't think we have archived weather on there so much, but it'll have the real-time conditions. So there is forecasts there. And so we would rely on those forecasts. We also use, just frankly, the Environment Canada forecast, other forecasts that are out there. I think I mentioned earlier, some of the contractors work with their own meteorologist. So for the most part, we'll use whatever we can get and then try and make the best decisions based on what we're hearing and seeing.
Yeah, and on the 511 side, we do source the information from Environment Canada as well. So we do provide both all of their local weather stations. So all of the weather stations are available, weather forecasts, so you can click on it and it will provide you the basic forecast, and then it will also give you the link into Environment Canada. And then we also source the weather radar as well through Environment Canada, and any of the official weather warnings are going to be coming from Environment Canada.
Great. And I think the last question we have right now is, does access to the RWIS platform allow partners to see the recommended maintenance actions, or is that only for AT?
So that's primarily right now for AT and our contractors. So that would be mainly the MDSS, because that's where the recommended measures will show up. So our contractors have access to that. Our maintenance contract inspectors, which is AT staff, they have access to those. But that's pretty much it right now. I'm not sure if we've shared that with anybody else at the moment. But as we evolve, we might look at that. But right now, it's with the maintenance contractors and with the department. I don't think we would ever share that publicly because it may lead to confusion. Because if for whatever reason something's down and the algorithm is, saying go out and salt and it's minus 25, that's the last thing in the world we want to do. So.
Perfect. I don't think I see any other questions. Just as a reminder, if anybody wants to get a hold of either Allan or Erin, they've been kind enough to share their email addresses with you, so please make note. We'll also, I think, be able to have those. The webinar will be posted online and made available at some point in the not too distant future, so that should be available there. Before you leave, please also, well, I guess one of two things. Judy, do you have anything that you want to get in and touch base on?
I do. I just wanted to thank the speakers, Allan and Erin. You are great speakers. You have another career ahead of you after AT. It was well presented. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you everyone for sticking around. Also, we'd like to encourage those on the phone, if you're not a member of a technical committee with ITS Canada, to please consider that. We could really use your help and really make it a better practice for all of us by sharing knowledge and how we do the projects, how we execute our projects. So please reach out to us, myself, Judy, or Omar, if you want more information about that. Also, that topics of interest. We're seeking more input from our member base about what you want to hear about and talk about. So again, reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
And this is Yannick here. I wanted to thank Judy and Omar for organizing this webinar together with the Allan and Wendy. And I want to let everybody know that ITS Canada's 2020 annual conference is coming to Edmonton, Alberta, June 14th to June 17th. Registration should open soon. If you want more details, you can visit the event website at itscanada2020.ca, and we look forward to seeing most of you in person when there's no snow and when the weather is warmer. although yeah, I've lived in Calgary, and I think when we were there, we had every month of the year we experienced snow. So I probably should maybe not say that. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, with that, thanks everybody for your time and joining us. We're 1 minute ahead of schedule for closing off, so you got a quick chance to get to your next meeting before your busy day ends. Again, as Judy mentioned, please reach out to us if there's any topics of interest that you'd like to hear more about, and both Judy and I are free and available to get a hold of. Our contact information is also available on the ITS Canada website under the about, I think it is, and there's links to the technical committees, and so you can learn about all the different technical committees there as well. With that, I guess, Yannicka, that's it. So thanks everybody, and we look forward to having another webinar again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.